Look into my eyes. Your soul is stained by the blood of the innocent. Feel their pain.
You should be taking a dirt nap after that ragdoll today.
I got lucky.
Luck don't cover it, JB. You got an angel looking after you.
Maybe it's something else.
Story goes that he'll be normal during the day, but at night, in the presence of evil, the Rider takes over.
For this episode, we are going back to the past, to the previous Ghost Rider. Now, as of this moment, I do not plan on reviewing all of Johnny Blaze's run as Ghost Rider, but I am reviewing stories from this issue's run that may be important for you viewers to know and be familiar with certain elements that may come up and play out as I review more of the 90s series. I don't want to say too much now, just know I will be coming back from time to time and reviewing more of Johnny Blaze issues in between issues from the 90s series. So without further ado, this is issue 68 from 1982. Of the first volume, according to the book itself, of Ghost Rider. This issue is the start of a new creative team, with Roger Stern as the writer, illustrator Bob Budiansky, inker Josef Rubinstein, letterer Diana Albers, colorist George Roussos, the last creative team to work on this volume of the series, and they start with a bang. The first issue of their run is sort of a recap. Flashback retelling of the origin of Johnny Blaze. The issue starts with a storm brewing just outside the chapel as we see a man, a priest, holding a candle inside, being startled as the front door creaks open. "Who is it? Who's there?" he shouts. He can't see well as the power is out and all he has is a candle for him to light his way. The man apologizes to the priest. He gives his name. It's Johnny Blaze. He states that I guess you could say he was looking for sanctuary. He was out traveling on his bike when he was caught in the storm. By the way, just so you guys know, one unique and cool thing about this series is that it doesn't just take place in New York. Most of the time, Johnny Blaze is out and about traveling the United States with a traveling carnival as a stunt cyclist. Alright, back to the story. The priest, still sounding shaken, says, "Of course, sanctuary. Come in and dry yourself off from the storm." The priest tells Johnny he will get more light for them, and he starts lighting more of the candles. Johnny comments in awe as he sees the candle holders are all made from real gold, stating that this church must get a lot of donations for those riches. The priest is like, "What? Yeah, totally." He's like, "But the riches of the earth pale before those of the spirit." He notices that Blaze seems troubled and asks if he would like any help or guidance. Johnny takes him up on the offer, saying he hasn't had anyone to confide in a long time. He tells him he would like to make a confession. He says he isn't of any faith, and the priest reassures him the confessional is for anyone who needs it. I don't know why, but I really like that exchange. It was pleasant. They begin. Blaze letting him know it's his first confession. He doesn't know exactly where he should start. The priest reassures him it's alright. No need to feel ashamed of his sins. He states to relax and just tell him about himself. Blaze starts at the beginning. His father was a motorcycle stunt rider. He didn't know his mother. His dad was the star performer with Crash Simpson's Daredevil cycle show. His father had been dodging death so much, it finally caught up to him, leaving Johnny an orphan as just a little boy. Crash offered him a choice, to either go to the orphanage or join him, his wife Mona, and their daughter Roxanne on the road. Roxanne pleading with Johnny to join them. Johnny agrees to stay with them, specifically stating that he would do anything for Roxanne. At first, he stayed on the sidelines. It took him a while to get over his fear of watching his father die. He finally got over his fear by the time he was 15. He would practice on a motorcycle with Roxanne every day. Unfortunately, one day things took a turn for the worst. When the engine caught fire while he and Roxanne were practicing, Rocky tumbled to safety, but Blaze didn't want to abandon the bike until it was safely away from the tent and wouldn't possibly catch the entire show on fire. He was inexperienced and so concerned with Rocky, he wasn't paying attention to where he was going and he went right into a tree. Mona, Crash's wife, saw the whole thing and ran to Johnny right away, right before the bike hit the tree. The tank exploded, and unfortunately Mona was caught in it. She was dying in the hospital when she regained consciousness and had Johnny promise to her that he would never perform in a show. As they buried Mona, he couldn't help but think of how he made that promise. The priest reassuring Blaze that he shouldn't punish himself, and that it's natural to turn inward to escape from grief. Reflecting on all this is noticeably getting to Johnny, as this is the first time in a long time that he's taken any time to reflect on his life and such tragedies. The priest starts spouting off about faith, and this triggers Johnny. He states that he lost his faith a long time ago. The priest thinks to himself that he should probably be careful as Johnny doesn't seem too stable. Johnny apologizes. He states that after Mona's death, he doesn't know why exactly, but he turned his interest into the occult. He started getting kinda too into it, reading book after book after book. Most of the stuff he read was pure nonsense, and the rest kinda gross. He stopped reading the books, but he didn't get rid of them. During this time, he kept his promise not to ride in the show. Instead, he became a mechanic. After a while, though, Crash and Roxanne started to get annoyed, thinking maybe he was a coward, and that's why he wasn't performing in the shows. He failed to mention to either one of them the promise he had made to Mona. Johnny himself was getting a little antsy and wanting to get on a bike again. That's when it hit him. He said he would never perform in the show. He technically never said anything about getting on a motorcycle and practicing for fun. He started practicing that night. Roxanne took notice and would watch him practice in secret. She totally has the hots for him. She lets him know she knows. She was just happy to know he wasn't a coward, and he was just happy to be with her. From then on, being a grease monkey for a living didn't seem so bad, just as long as she was by his side. At the same time, the cycle show became bigger and bigger. Their popularity was on fire. Of course, things like this for Johnny Blaze can't last. Just as the show was reaching an all-time high, they got booked for the biggest show ever. Roxanne and Johnny were stoked, but Crash, he seemed disheartened. Just once, he was gonna reach the big time. He got the news from his doctor that he may not live to see it. He has a month at most, specifically stating that he just wished he had a son to turn the show over to. See, Johnny still hadn't told Crash about his promise to Mona, and only Roxanne knows that he still rides and practices stunts at night. Crash looked at Blaze as a traitor. The news about Crash was the final straw. Blaze wasn't going to let Crash go without trying something desperate. That night, Blaze would do something so drastic it would affect the rest of his life. He was going to make a deal with the devil. Those occult books he used to read had rituals. Blaze decided to perform one that night, pleading with the Prince of Darkness to spare Crash Simpson of the disease which was killing him in exchange for his soul. Let's see how well that goes for him, shall we? 3 weeks later, New York, the big night. Crash was still convinced it was his last performance. If he was gonna go, he was gonna go out in a blaze of glory. Dude was gonna jump 22 cars. The world record. Johnny was excited for him. He gave Johnny a thumbs up as he blasted off. Johnny was confident nothing was going to happen to him, as the devil gave his word. That's when it happened. The crash. Crash Simpson was gone. That night, Johnny was alone, dwelling about what could have gone wrong. Suddenly, the devil appeared, Blaze pissed and cursing at him for lying.
Silence. I kept my bargain. The mortal did not die of disease. Now I claim my reward.
Just as the devil would go on to consume Johnny's soul, Roxanne bursts in. It seems as though she familiarized herself with Johnny's books, too. She was able to ward off Satan by spouting off some lingo. She saved Blaze that night, and in return, Blaze told her that he loved her. He tells the priest that he had sold his soul to Satan, and was saved by Roxanne. He doesn't even know where she is now. He tells the priest that he ruins the lives of those that get close to him. The priest thinks that he is delusional and tells him as much. He says Johnny needs to come back to reality. Blaze tells him that he wishes he was crazy. That night, the devil hadn't been finished with him, that he had sat him up with a curse. That next night, Johnny had broken his promise to Mona, and decided to perform as he couldn't leave it all on Roxanne's shoulders. Johnny was just as good, if not better than Crash. While in his dressing room changing, before his very eyes, he witnessed, in the mirror, his skin start to melt, as his skull began to burn. He was engulfed in hellfire. He was now, and forevermore, the Ghost Rider. It seems as though Satan had bonded a demon to Johnny's very soul. At first, Johnny could control the changes, but over time, the demon grew stronger, until eventually there was no stopping him. The demon controls hellfire and can create a hell cycle. This hell cycle can reach unbelievable speeds. Even riding up buildings or on water, he can create walls of hellfire, and bullets are useless against him. He can even turn his fire into a cold flame that doesn't burn the body, but instead, only the soul. The dude is scary badass. He lives to punish the guilty, obsessed with vengeance. He will stop at nothing to mete it out, disregarding innocent lives in the process. He is a force to be reckoned with. Only after getting his vengeance is he satisfied, and does he let Johnny have his body back, leaving Johnny to deal with the consequences and the painful memories of what has transpired. Johnny's life has been ruined by the Rider's constant need for vengeance. He has lost countless jobs, his relationship with Roxanne. He has wandered from place to place, spending most of his time trying to keep the Rider bottled up, and failing from time to time. Johnny explains to the priest what he feels most guilty about is he sometimes wants the Rider to get out. He will see others being hurt and wants the Rider to deal out a punishment to the guilty, as they deserve it. The priest is shocked and taken back, wondering how he got himself into this. Blaze, seeing that the priest looks as though his mind is wandering, he's like, "Are you there?" The priest is like, go on. Blaze responds, "There really isn't much more to tell." This leads me to tonight. As he was heading into town, he was taking a back road when all of a sudden he stumbled upon a man that was lying in a ditch, left for dead, who just happened to be a priest. Our priest seems shocked to hear this. Before the poor man had perished, he had told Blaze how his murderer had ambushed him and stolen his clothes. Blaze had been curious about this last part, until he noticed all the fancy gold in this particular church. He goads the would-be priest, stating, "Quite a haul, isn't it?" He's starting to look concerned. Blaze exclaims that when the man died in his arms, he knew what he had to do. During this whole exchange, we are seeing all of this through the imposter's pew, and more light seems to be coming in from Blaze's pew. And you know what that means. A flaming skeleton hand bursts from Blaze's pew. The imposter and murderer start screaming and running for it. Ghost Rider exclaims that the masks are off, and now he belongs to the Ghost Rider for judgment. He goes to shoot the Rider, then tries to crush him with a heavy object. All fail, and the Rider starts laughing maniacally, enjoying the murderer's struggle to get away. But there is no escaping the Ghost Rider. The murderer makes it outside and steals Johnny's bike. What follows is a chase in the rain as the Rider is right behind on a hell cycle. The Rider enjoys the chase, and he boasts about how more satisfying it is when you finally get his hands on him. While riding into the field, surrounded by haystacks, the hay bursts into flames. At this point, the Rider is just mocking him and playing with him as he rides literal circles around the murderer, laughing like a banshee as he does it. Johnny's version of the Ghost Rider is the definition of nightmare fuel. He blocks any possible exit from the murderer, while on train tracks no less. He crashes on the tracks, and of course, there is a train coming. I mean, why wouldn't there be? The Rider creeps closer.
Vengeance shall be mine.
The murderer, afraid that the Rider is going to let him be run down by the train, the Rider is like, "Don't be ridiculous. Vengeance will be dealt out by his hand. Death is too good for the likes of him." He burns and scolds the man's very soul as the roaring train in the background drowns out the screams of the murderer. That morning, EMTs and the cops are on the scene, taking what's left of the murderer to an ambulance. The man is petrified. The lights are on, but nobody's home. if you know what I mean. Blaze is discussing with an officer how he found him that way. The cop tells him that he isn't really a priest and that he killed the real one. The cop recognizes Blaze from his stunt performing. The issue ends on a pretty badass note. The cop asking, what do you suppose would possess a man to do such a thing like that? Blaze responds, who can say, Sergeant? Greed, hate, fear. A man can have a lot of demons locked up inside him. But when that happens, heaven help us all. There are significant differences between Blaze's series and Dan's. One major one is the curse aspect is a much larger theme and a burden upon Blaze. Blaze and his demon rarely, if ever, get along. Whereas, minor spoiler, Dan and his demon form a bit of a bond, communicating and working together from time to time. Dan sees the Ghost Rider as much more of a heroic figure who saves lives and fights baddies, whereas Blaze is much more of a horror story, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or just straightforward a man possessed by a demon. Dan's Rider is just meting out vengeance as a form of justice. It's a job he performs, saving lives in the process, whereas Blaze's Rider would toy with his prey, and doesn't give a single fuck who's in the way, innocent or not. We will talk more about this as I go over more issues from Blaze's run. This issue was just stellar. The way the narrative is structured was really cool, as it's both a retelling of the origin story, but being done by the protagonist to what seems to be a priest in a confession of sorts. A classic narrative move that has been done in stories before, but then, in a surprise move, it's turned on its head when we find out the priest isn't really a priest at all, but instead an imposter that killed the priest to rob the church.
Now that's fucked up.
For the final chunk of this issue, we get the badass chase as the Rider hunts down the murderer and does what he does best. Now, not only is the writing and plotting in this issue fantastic, but the classic 80s artwork is great. Bob Budiansky does a great job structuring the scenes and paces out the action really well. I also particularly like the way he draws Blaze himself. I don't have a reason why, I just really like it. I really dig the inking, especially on the first page, with the shadows from the storm. It really sets the mood for the story. Anyway, that's it for this one. In the next video, it's back to the 90s with issue 4 of the 90s Ghost Rider. You can run, but you can't hide. See you next time.